The moment the story broke, the world froze. A son suing a father is dramatic enough. But a prince suing a king? That's the kind of headline that makes even seasoned journalists stop, blink twice, and wonder if the world has tilted on its axis. But before we continue, please subscribe and turn on the notification bell for updates. It happened on a gray morning in London, the kind where the fog clings to the streets and the palace gates feel like silent witnesses to a secret no one was supposed to hear. Reporters pushed forward, microphones raised like weapons, as a single question sliced through the cold air. Is it true Prince Harry is taking legal action against King Charles? Nobody answered. Nobody needed to. The energy in the air said everything. But the real shock wasn't the lawsuit itself. It was the reason behind it. Why would Harry, who spent years fighting to protect Meghan, suddenly be thrust into a legal war with the very institution he was born into? Why now? Why this moment? What changed? And what would push King Charles, calm, reserved, so careful with public optics, to move forward with a decision as irreversible and explosive as stripping Meghan Markle of the Duchess of Sussex title? Questions were everywhere. Answers were nowhere. And yet, behind palace doors, behind closed legal chambers, behind a swirl of emotional storms, there was one truth. Something had snapped. Not gently, not slowly, but violently. It began with a single document. A document never meant to leave the palace walls. A document that somehow ended up directly in Harry's hands. And when he read it, line by line, clause by clause, the color drained from his face. The title was not being reviewed. It was not under discussion. It was not pending further consideration. It was being removed. Final, unquestionable, irreversible, and the order had already been drafted. Now pause for a moment and think. What would you do if the world told you your partner, your spouse, the person you left your country for, the person you defended for years, was about to be stripped of the very title that symbolized your union with the monarchy? Would you fight? Would you walk away? Would you stay silent? Would you accept it as fate? But Harry wasn't built for silence. Not anymore. He had spent years feeling unheard inside those palace walls. Years feeling blamed for decisions he didn't make. Years watching the woman he loved stand in the center of storms she didn't ask for. So when he realized the title removal was not only happening, but happening quietly, behind his back, his response wasn't diplomatic. It was legal. But to understand why this moment erupted so violently, you have to understand the ghosts that followed Harry through the corridors of royal power long before this lawsuit was ever filed. The tension didn't begin this year, or even last year. It's a story rooted in whispers, wounds, misunderstandings, and decisions that looked harmless until they stacked on top of each other like unstable stones. And maybe the most dangerous truth of all is this. This wasn't just about Meghan's title. It was about control, trust, legacy, and the fear, buried deep inside the monarchy, that one misstep could crack the crown itself. Because behind the scenes, King Charles wasn't only acting as a father. He was acting as the monarch responsible for the image of the institution. Every headline matters. Every scandal lingers. Every rumor snowballs. And every choice has consequences for centuries, not just years. So imagine his position. A son who stepped down. A daughter-in-law who became one of the most controversial public figures in modern royal history. And a monarchy trying desperately to hold itself together under global scrutiny. But there was something else, something darker, something so shocking that even the senior courtiers refused to speak of it without closed doors and lowered voices. Because the truth is, Charles didn't just wake up one morning and say, "It's time to remove Meghan's title." Something triggered him. Something specific. Something recent. Something serious enough to override hesitation, caution, and tradition. And what was it? We'll get there. But first, let's go back, before the lawsuit, before the leaked document, before the legal team scrambled, before Harry's rage hit its peak. Let's go back to the moment Meghan herself found out. It was not a palace announcement. It wasn't an official letter. Not even a dignified phone call. It was a rumor. A whisper. A comment overheard in a place she never expected to hear royal business discussed. At first, she brushed it off. She had learned to ignore gossip. She had learned to smile through speculation. She had learned that every week came with a new narrative about her life. But this time, the whisper didn't fade. It grew louder. spread wider, became more detailed, and Meghan's stomach tightened, not because she feared losing a title, but because she feared what the loss symbolized. Loss of acceptance, loss of recognition, loss of the last symbolic thread tying her to the institution she had entered with hope. So she called Harry, not calmly, not casually, but with a tremor in her voice he hadn't heard since the worst days of the royal transition. "Is it true?" she asked. Harry didn't know. Not yet. But hours later, he would. And when he did, everything changed. Now picture this moment. Harry sitting alone, the document glowing on the screen in front of him, the official seal unmistakable. He scrolls, 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 until he reaches the final line. The verdict, the confirmation, the decision made without him. And something inside him breaks. Because this wasn't just about titles. It was about betrayal. And betrayal from your own father. The man you shared holidays, memories, conflicts, apologies, and moments of reconciliation with, is a kind of pain that doesn't fade easily. But before Harry could even decide what to do next, before he could call Meghan back, before he could gather his thoughts, something else happened. Something that would push him over the edge and transform quiet anger into explosive action. A second document arrived. This one worse. Not only did it confirm the title stripping, it contained the justification, the argument, the evidence the palace claimed supported the decision. And in that document, Harry found something he never expected. A name, a person, someone who, according to the palace, had provided information that contributed to the decision. Someone Harry trusted. Someone he spoke to regularly. Someone he would have defended without hesitation. When he saw the name, he froze. Why would they say this person was involved? Was it true? Was it manipulated? Was it a palace tactic? Or was something far more complicated happening behind the scenes? He didn't know, but he knew one thing. This was no longer just a royal dispute. It was war. Before he did anything else, he drove straight to his legal team. He walked into the office without an appointment, without warning, without hesitation. Witnesses later said he looked like someone who had made a decision he could no longer undo. "Prepare the paperwork," he said. They didn't ask what for. By then, they already knew. But here's the twist. Harry wasn't just filing a lawsuit for the sake of conflict. He wasn't doing it because of headlines or pressure or pride. He filed it because he believed something bigger was happening, something he couldn't publicly reveal yet, something that tied directly into the timing of the title stripping, something connected to events that had been unfolding quietly for months. And that something? It had very little to do with Meghan, and everything to do with someone else entirely. Who? And why would their involvement shake the foundation of the monarchy? The answer is coming. But what came next would change everything, and no one saw it coming. The moment the story broke, the world froze. A son suing a father is dramatic enough, but a prince suing a king? That's the kind of headline that makes even seasoned journalists stop, blink twice, and wonder if the world has tilted on its axis. It happened on a gray morning in London, the kind where the fog clings to the streets and the palace gates feel like silent witnesses to a secret no one was supposed to hear. Reporters pushed forward, microphones raised like weapons, as a single question sliced through the cold air. Is it true Prince Harry is taking legal action against King Charles? Nobody answered. Nobody needed to. The energy in the air said everything. But the real shock wasn't the lawsuit itself. It was the reason behind it. Why would Harry, who spent years fighting to protect Meghan, suddenly be thrust into a legal war with the very institution he was born into? Why now? Why this moment? What changed? And what would push King Charles, calm, reserved, so careful with public optics, to move forward with a decision as irreversible and explosive as stripping Meghan Markle of the Duchess of Sussex title? Questions were everywhere. Answers were nowhere. And yet, behind palace doors, behind closed legal chambers, behind a swirl of emotional storms, there was one truth. Something had snapped. Not gently, not slowly, but violently. It began with a single document. A document never meant to leave the palace walls. A document that somehow ended up directly in Harry's hands. And when he read it, line by line, clause by clause, the color drained from his face. The title was not being reviewed. It was not under discussion. It was not pending further consideration. It was being removed. Final, unquestionable, irreversible. and the order had already been drafted. Now pause for a moment and think. What would you do if the world told you your partner, your spouse, the person you left your country for, the person you defended for years, was about to be stripped of the very title that symbolized your union with the monarchy? Would you fight? Would you walk away? Would you stay silent? Would you accept it as fate? But Harry wasn't built for silence. Not anymore. He had spent years feeling unheard inside those palace walls. Years feeling blamed for decisions he didn't make. Years watching the woman he loved stand in the center of storms she didn't ask for. So when he realized the title removal was not only happening, but happening quietly, behind his back, his response wasn't diplomatic. It was legal. But to understand why this moment erupted so violently, you have to understand the ghosts that followed Harry through the corridors of royal power long before this lawsuit was ever filed. The tension didn't begin this year, or even last year. It's a story rooted in whispers, wounds, misunderstandings, and decisions that looked harmless until they stacked on top of each other like unstable stones. And maybe the most dangerous truth of all is this. This wasn't just about Meghan's title. It was about control, trust, legacy, and the fear, buried deep inside the monarchy, that one misstep could crack the crown itself. Because behind the scenes, King Charles wasn't only acting as a father. He was acting as the monarch responsible for the image of the institution. Every headline matters. Every scandal lingers. Every rumor snowballs. And every choice has consequences for centuries, not just years. So imagine his position. A son who stepped down. A daughter-in-law who became one of the most controversial public figures in modern royal history. And a monarchy trying desperately to hold itself together under global scrutiny. But there was something else, something darker, something so shocking that even the senior courtiers refused to speak of it without closed doors and lowered voices. Because the truth is, Charles didn't just wake up one morning and say, "It's time to remove Meghan's title." Something triggered him. Something specific. Something recent. Something serious enough to override hesitation, caution, and tradition. And what was it? We'll get there. But first, let's go back, before the lawsuit, before the leaked document, before the legal team scrambled, before Harry's rage hit its peak. Let's go back to the moment Meghan herself found out. It was not a palace announcement. It wasn't an official letter. Not even a dignified phone call. It was a rumor. A whisper. A comment overheard in a place she never expected to hear royal business discussed. At first, she brushed it off. She had learned to ignore gossip. She had learned to smile through speculation. She had learned that every week came with a new narrative about her life. But this time, the whisper didn't fade. It grew louder, spread wider, became more detailed, and Meghan's stomach tightened. Not because she feared losing a title, but because she feared what the loss symbolized. Loss of acceptance. Loss of recognition. Loss of the last symbolic thread tying her to the institution she had entered with hope. So she called Harry. Not calmly, not casually, but with a tremor in her voice he hadn't heard since the worst days of the royal transition. "Is it true?" she asked. Harry didn't know. Not yet. But hours later, he would. And when he did, everything changed. Now picture this moment. Harry sitting alone, the document glowing on the screen in front of him, the official seal unmistakable. He scrolls, 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 until he reaches the final line. The verdict, the confirmation, the decision made without him. And something inside him breaks. Because this wasn't just about titles. It was about betrayal. And betrayal from your own father. The man you shared holidays, memories, conflicts, apologies, and moments of reconciliation with, is a kind of pain that doesn't fade easily. But before Harry could even decide what to do next, before he could call Meghan back, before he could gather his thoughts, something else happened. Something that would push him over the edge and transform quiet anger into explosive action. A second document arrived. This one worse. Not only did it confirm the title stripping, it contained the justification, the argument, the evidence the palace claimed supported the decision. And in that document, Harry found something he never expected. A name, a person, someone who, according to the palace, had provided information that contributed to the decision. Someone Harry trusted. Someone he spoke to regularly. Someone he would have defended without hesitation. When he saw the name, he froze. Why would they say this person was involved? Was it true? Was it manipulated? Was it a palace tactic? Or was something far more complicated happening behind the scenes? He didn't know, but he knew one thing. This was no longer just a royal dispute. It was war. Before he did anything else, he drove straight to his legal team. He walked into the office without an appointment, without warning, without hesitation. Witnesses later said he looked like someone who had made a decision he could no longer undo. "Prepare the paperwork," he said. They didn't ask what for. By then, they already knew. But here's the twist. Harry wasn't just filing a lawsuit for the sake of conflict. He wasn't doing it because of headlines or pressure or pride. He filed it because he believed something bigger was happening, something he couldn't publicly reveal yet, something that tied directly into the timing of the title stripping, something connected to events that had been unfolding quietly for months. And that something? It had very little to do with Meghan, and everything to do with someone else entirely. Who? And why would their involvement shake the foundation of the monarchy? The answer is coming. But what came next would change everything. And no one saw it coming. It started on a morning that felt too calm for the kind of chaos it was about to unleash. London was quiet. The kind of quiet that almost feels staged, like the city itself was holding its breath before an explosion no one could stop. Inside Clarence's house, long before the press caught scent of anything, long before phones began ringing non-stop, long before Harry even knew what was happening to his family's future, the storm had already begun. Because at exactly 7:14 a.m., a senior advisor opened a sealed folder and whispered 5 words that sent a lightning bolt through the entire building. "The king wants it finalized." Finalized. Not reviewed. Not postponed. Not debated. Finalized. Now imagine being in that room. Imagine watching seasoned staff, people who had served the monarchy for decades, who had seen scandals, resignations, scandals, abdications, and yes, even the darkest chapters of royal history, suddenly stiffen as if the air had turned to ice. Because stripping a title is not paperwork. It is not ceremony. It is not political strategy. It is the nuclear option. And this wasn't just any title. It was Meghan Markle's title, the Duchess of Sussex, a title given to her on her wedding day. A title broadcast to millions. A title that symbolized unity, celebration, and the moment the monarchy promised the world it was ready to evolve. But now that title was about to be taken back. Why? That was the question hanging in every corner of Clarence's house. A question nobody had the courage to say out loud. Not yet. At 7:27 a.m., the first briefing memo circulated. By 7:35 a.m., the palace's internal communications line was already flooded with questions from departments that were told absolutely nothing. And by 8:01 a.m., King Charles arrived. He didn't greet anyone. He didn't offer a morning nod. He didn't even remove his gloves before speaking. Instead, he walked straight to the conference table, placed a hand on the folder, and said a single sentence. "We are moving forward." No explanation, no elaboration, no justification. And that said everything. Because when a monarch speaks in absolutes, everyone else must scramble to interpret the pieces he's choosing not to say. Now here's where things get complicated. Because while the palace thunder was building in London, Harry was thousands of miles away, completely unaware his day was about to implode. He woke up to sunlight, coffee, routine, normalcy. But normal had a short lifespan that morning. Let me ask you something. Have you ever had a day that started perfectly fine, only to become the kind of day that splits your life into before and after? Ever had a moment where one notification, one message, one unexpected call made your stomach drop even before you knew why? That's exactly what happened to Harry. It began with a voicemail. Not from Meghan, not from a friend, not from an advisor. No, it was from someone Harry rarely heard from directly, someone who only reached out when something significant was at stake. A royal aide. "Call me immediately," the message said. Urgent tone. No details. Harry felt the shift instantly, the same way you can feel pressure change before a storm hits. But he didn't call back right away. Because before he could even unlock his phone fully, a second message arrived. This one worse. A message forwarded by someone on his communications team. A message that simply read, "Is this true?" Attached was a screenshot. A blurry photo of a printed memo. A memo stamped with the unmistakable insignia of the crown. Harry zoomed in. The text was small, grainy, distorted, but one line cut through all the noise. Duchess of Sussex, termination of title. He blinked. Once. Twice. He read it again, as if the words might rearrange themselves into something less catastrophic. They didn't. Have you ever had that moment? Where your brain tries to protect you by slowing down the world, giving you a heartbeat's worth of denial before reality consumes you. That was Harry in that instant. His coffee went cold. The room around him faded. The seconds felt heavy. And then, his phone began exploding. Calls, emails, warnings, half-truths, incoherent fragments from people who shouldn't have known anything yet. Something had leaked. And whatever leaked had been enough to send shockwaves from London to Los Angeles in minutes. Harry grabbed his keys, ignored every unanswered call, and left. He didn't care where he was going. He just had to move. Think. Breathe. But back at Clarence's house, things were only getting more intense. The king's advisors knew the leak was catastrophic, but they didn't know how catastrophic. Not yet. Not until a junior staff member sprinted into the room, pale as a ghost, clutching a phone like it was a live grenade. "Sir," they said, voice shaking. "It's already trending." That sentence alone would have sent panic through any institution. But when they read the headline attached to it, even Charles froze. The headline read, "King moves to strip Meghan Markle of Duchess title. Final decision imminent." Final decision. Imminent. Published before the palace said a single word. And for the monarchy, that wasn't just a PR disaster. It was a breach of trust. It meant someone inside had broken ranks. Someone close to the process had leaked confidential information. Someone Charles trusted. But who? That question, just like every other question that morning, hung in the air with no answer in sight. Meanwhile, Harry's day was unraveling in real time. He tried calling Meghan. No answer. He tried again. Still nothing. His heart tightened. Not because she was ignoring him, but because he knew her well enough to know one thing. She was already spiraling. He drove faster. Every red light felt like an accusation. Every second lost felt like betrayal. Every sense of helplessness fueled the fire building in his chest. By the time he pulled into the driveway, he was already halfway between panic and rage. Meghan opened the door. Her eyes said everything. She didn't need to speak. She didn't need to ask. He already knew she'd seen it. But she did say one sentence. One small, fragile sentence that shattered him. "They didn't even tell you, did they?" Harry didn't answer. Because answering would mean acknowledging the truth. And acknowledging the truth would mean accepting the reality that his father, his own father, had made the most consequential decision of their entire royal life without involving him at all. Imagine that for a moment. Imagine learning the world has already decided something about your family, something permanent, before you were even given a chance to respond. Would you forgive it? Could you? Harry couldn't. Not that morning. Not with that much betrayal burning in his chest. He sat down, opened his laptop, and waited. Not for confirmation. Not for explanation. Not even for apology. He waited for the document. Because he knew, when something leaks that explosively, the palace would be forced to issue internal communications quickly. And he was right. At 10:03 a.m., an email arrived. Confidential. Urgent. For internal review only. He clicked it. The document loaded slowly. Too slowly. As if the world knew it was holding its breath again. And then, he saw it. The official plan. The justification. The timeline. The final authorization. But what he saw next, that was the moment the day broke apart completely. Because at the bottom, under the section titled Supplemental Input from Trusted Advisors, there was a name he never expected to see. A name that made him sit back. A name that made him whisper, "No, that's impossible." A name that made his hands shake. Someone he trusted. Someone he spoke to often. Someone he believed would never, ever be part of a decision like this. Why would they be involved? Why would the palace use their statements as part of the reasoning? Was it true? Or was someone manipulating the narrative? He didn't know, but he knew one thing. He couldn't let it go. Because the moment he saw that name, the situation stopped being political. It became personal. And personal battles are the most dangerous kind. Especially when they're happening inside a royal family already stretched to its breaking point. Harry stood up, walked to the window, and said the words that would define the rest of this story. They're not doing this. Not like this. Not without a fight. But what Harry didn't know, not yet, was that the leak was only the beginning. Because somewhere inside Clarence's house, Someone else was reading the very same document. Someone Harry trusted. Someone who wasn't supposed to know their name had been included. Someone who would very soon realize they were being used as a pawn in a much bigger game. And their reaction? That reaction would ignite the next explosion in a story already spiraling out of control. But that part comes next. Because the truth behind that name, the truth behind the leak, the truth behind the king's sudden urgency. What came next would change everything, and no one saw it coming. The call that changed everything didn't begin with anger. It didn't begin with panic. It didn't even begin with shock. It began with silence. Not empty silence. Not awkward silence. But the kind of silence that carries weight, pressure, meaning. The silence of a woman sitting alone with a truth she didn't want to believe. Meghan had stared at her phone for almost a full minute before pressing the green button. The news spreading online felt unreal, like a distorted dream she hadn't woken from yet. But reality has sharp edges, and every minute that passed made the headlines feel more and more like a blade against her skin. When Harry answered, his voice was calm. Too calm. That was the first red flag. Because calmness from Harry during crisis never meant peace. It meant he was barely holding the pieces of himself together. "Harry," she whispered. "Meg, I'm here." And then came the silence. The thick, heavy, painful silence where both of them knew that the next sentence spoken was going to break something. Maybe for good. Let me ask you something. Have you ever been on the edge of saying something you knew would change everything? Ever felt that tiny moment where your heart beats faster because you're afraid of the answer you're about to hear? That's where Meghan was. She finally breathed in. "Is it true?" 2 seconds passed. 3, 4. Harry didn't answer. And that silence said everything she feared. The world around Meghan seemed to tilt. She felt the room shrink. Her palms sweat. Her heartbeat echo in her ears. It wasn't the title itself that hurt. It was what the title represented. The acceptance she once hoped for. The promises made on the day she married a prince. The belief that she could bring something new, fresh, meaningful into the royal fold. Now all of that was being erased in a single stroke of royal authority. Harry finally spoke. "There's a document. No explanation. No comfort. Just those 4 words. A document. The kind that decides futures. The kind that closes doors. The kind that separates people from institutions." Meghan swallowed hard. She knew that tone. Harry wasn't hiding anything. He simply didn't have the strength to say more. And that scared her more than the headline itself. For a moment, she tried to laugh it off. A small, shaky laugh that didn't reach her eyes. This has to be wrong. Someone is exaggerating. It's just gossip again. Right. Again, silence. This time, it wasn't heavy. It was devastating. When Harry finally explained what he had seen. How official the memo looked. How urgent the palace's internal communications sounded. Something inside Meghan cracked. But instead of collapsing, she straightened her back. Because here's the truth most people never saw. Meghan wasn't weak. She wasn't naive. She wasn't someone who fell apart at the first sign of a headline. But she was human. And humans break when the weight becomes too much. She took a long breath. "Harry, why would they do this now?" That question had layers. It wasn't just about timing. It was about motive. Intent, pressure, politics, revenge, image, reputation. Because nothing in the monarchy happens just because. Harry walked through the official explanation he received. The vague phrases, the complicated language, the constitutional jargon used to mask something far simpler. Someone wanted the title gone. Someone with enough influence to push it through. Someone who had been building a case behind the scenes. Meghan listened without interrupting. She didn't cry. She didn't yell. She didn't accuse. But her voice lowered into something colder. "So they're erasing me?" Harry knew that wasn't the whole truth. The decision had nothing to do with erasing her history. It had to do with preventing her future. And Meghan sensed that. Suddenly, her voice sharpened. This isn't about a title. Someone is trying to send a message. Then, for the first time since the call began, she said something Harry didn't expect. "Harry, did they ever even want me there in the first place?" He closed his eyes. Because that question wasn't fair. And yet it was. Harry had fought battles she never saw. Meetings she was never allowed to attend. Conversations she wasn't supposed to hear. Opinions whispered behind closed doors. He didn't want to tell her the truth. Not fully. Not yet. But she already knew. Because when someone's identity becomes a headline, when their character becomes a debate, when their marriage becomes a public battleground. There's no such thing as not knowing the truth. Meghan inhaled slowly. I tried, Harry. I really did. Her voice cracked, not from self-pity, but from exhaustion. I tried to be what they wanted. I tried to follow the rules. I tried to respect the traditions. I tried to keep peace. And now, after everything this? Harry tightened his grip on the phone. Meg, this isn't your fault. But she wasn't convinced. Are you sure? Because sometimes I feel like the world has decided that everything wrong with the monarchy somehow begins with me. That sentence hit Harry like a punch. Because he had felt that too. Not because he believed it. Never because he believed it. But because he saw the narrative forming long before Meghan ever realized it was happening. This wasn't a simple headline. This wasn't a misunderstanding. This was something coordinated. That was what scared him. Meghan exhaled again, softer this time. Harry, what are we going to do? He didn't answer right away. Because the truth wasn't simple. The truth wasn't easy. The truth had consequences. And the truth was already bigger than Meghan realized. He finally said, I'm going to stop it. Meghan's heart jumped. How? Harry hesitated. There's one option. One I never wanted to use. In that instant, Meghan understood. Her voice dropped. You're going to challenge it legally. Harry didn't confirm. He didn't need to. Because Meghan wasn't asking a question. She was stating what she feared. The monarchy had lawyers. The government had lawyers. Parliament had procedures. And Harry, whether he liked it or not, was now on the opposite side of all three. Meghan whispered, Harry, if you do this, there's no going back. And that's when something happened that shifted the entire tone of the call. A contradiction. A surprise. Something Meghan didn't expect from him. Harry laughed. A tired, bitter laugh. They already crossed the line, Meg. I'm just catching up. And then he added a sentence that would echo long after the call ended. They're not just coming for your title. They're coming for our whole story. Meghan froze. What do you mean? Harry closed the document he'd been staring at since dawn. And that's when he saw it. A second email. A second attachment. A second justification. One that Meghan didn't know about yet. He didn't want to tell her over the phone. Not like this. Not with her voice already trembling. But she wasn't letting it go. Harry, tell me. His throat tightened. Meg, someone gave input to the palace. Input? Who? Harry didn't answer. He couldn't. Not yet. Because revealing that name in this moment, over the phone, with Meghan already shaken, with the situation spiraling, felt like dropping gasoline on an open flame. Meghan sensed his hesitation instantly. Harry, who? He exhaled. There's someone we didn't expect. Her voice went sharp. Who? Harry hesitated, and hesitated, and hesitated. And in that hesitation, Meghan's world tilted in a direction she wasn't prepared for. Because one thing became very clear to her. Whoever's name was in that document wasn't a stranger. Wasn't an enemy. Wasn't a critic. It was someone close. Someone trusted. Someone who could tip the entire situation into catastrophe. She whispered, Harry, why aren't you saying anything? He closed his eyes. Because I don't know if it's real or if someone is trying to manipulate us. And before she could reply, before she could calm down or explode or demand answers, Harry's phone buzzed. A call. From the very person whose name was in that document. He stared at the screen. Meghan sensed it instantly. Who is it? Harry, who's calling you? His voice dropped to a whisper. It's them. Who? And then the call ended. What Harry learned next. What that person said. What that name really meant. And how it connected to the title stripping. What came next would change everything. And no one saw it coming that it was a morning like any other. Or so it seemed. But inside the king's private chambers, calm was a lie. A veneer. A fragile mask stretched over a storm no one could see. Charles had been awake long before dawn. He had walked the halls of Buckingham and Clarence House in near silence, his footsteps echoing against walls lined with portraits of ancestors whose eyes seemed to watch every move. The weight of history pressed on him, as it always did, but today, it was heavier. He felt it in his chest, in the tightening of his throat, in the flicker of anger behind his composed exterior. Because today wasn't just any day. Today was the day he had to act. Shocking, isn't it, to imagine a monarch? Someone trained to calculate every word, every gesture, every glance, feeling unsteady? But even kings reach a breaking point. Even kings have moments where decisions can no longer wait. cannot be softened, cannot be postponed. And Charles was there. The title removal, the finality, the whispers, the leaks. All of it had stacked like dry timber in a dry room. One spark, and everything could ignite. The spark came from multiple directions. From advisors who pressed, warned, and occasionally argued. From whispers in the corridors of power. From media speculation that had already taken on a life of its own. From an internal memo that, by now, had been leaked to Harry. He clenched his fist as he read the reports again and again. How had it gotten to Harry before anyone else? Was it sabotage? Carelessness? A test of loyalty? Questions circled endlessly in his mind, faster than his ability to answer. And then there was the reality of history. The monarchy isn't forgiving. It isn't flexible. It is slow-moving, yes, but when it moves, it hits with the weight of centuries. And once a precedent is set, there's no undoing it, no erasing it, no retreat. Charles knew that stripping Meghan's title wasn't just a personal decision. It wasn't about Harry. It wasn't about Meghan. It was about legacy. It was about maintaining authority. It was about ensuring that the institution he was entrusted with survived, no matter the cost to relationships, no matter the cost to personal bonds. So he called the meeting, not a casual briefing, not a consultative session, a meeting that would define the rest of his reign. Advisors arrived promptly. Senior aides, legal teams, communications officers, all entering the room with expressions measured but tense. They all knew something monumental was coming. They just didn't know if they were ready for it. Charles spoke without preamble. We moved forward. No discussion, no debate, just authority. Absolute. Final. The room was silent for a heartbeat that felt like an eternity. Then questions erupted. Then explanations. Then reassurances. Then doubts. One of his closest advisors dared to speak first. Your Majesty, with all due respect, Harry will react. The public, the press, it will be explosive. Charles did not flinch. He already knew. He had expected it. The storm wasn't a risk. It was inevitable. And that was precisely why he needed to act before Harry could escalate. Have you ever faced a decision you knew would hurt someone you love, but also knew it couldn't be avoided? That was Charles in that room. Every word calculated. Every move strategic. Every consideration weighing the future of the monarchy against the natural pull of paternal loyalty. The legal team laid out potential consequences. Public opinion. Media narrative. International backlash. All scenarios. All risks. All pointing to one conclusion: inaction would be worse. Charles listened quietly, not because he doubted the advice, but because he already knew. And then came the moment that truly broke him. An aide slid across the table a folder. The folder contained messages, whispers, internal reports, allegations, not just about Meghan, not just about Harry, but about events and conversations Charles had been deliberately shielded from. Evidence, apparently compiled over months, pointing to decisions, actions, and statements that had been hidden from him. One of the memos included personal observations, notes about Harry's attitude, Meghan's public appearances, even offhand remarks by palace staff about loyalty and influence. Charles read them slowly, line by line, and with each word, the anger inside him rose. Anger, hurt, frustration, betrayal, confusion. He slammed the folder down. Enough. It was enough. He couldn't wait any longer. Not for apologies. Not for explanations. Not for calm reasoning. He would act. And he would act now. The decision was made. But he didn't yet know one thing. The leak. The document that had reached Harry before him. That fact, unknown to him, meant Harry was already mobilizing. Already considering legal action. Already preparing to challenge the monarchy itself. Charles's mind raced. Could he anticipate Harry's response? Could he predict the damage that would follow? Could he control the narrative before it spiraled completely out of his hands? He didn't have to, because in royal history, control is an illusion. And the moment one thinks they have absolute authority, the universe has a way of reminding them otherwise. By late morning, Charles had summoned additional advisors. He reviewed press strategy, legal justification, ceremonial protocol, and contingency plans. Every detail had been checked. Every possible scenario had been mapped. But even with all that preparation, a sense of dread lingered. A gnawing awareness that this would not end neatly. That someone would strike back. that someone he loved might choose confrontation over compromise. Because the title removal wasn't simply administrative. It was symbolic. It was emotional. It was personal. And when something is personal, logic often fails. Hours passed. Documents were signed. Protocols reviewed. Messages drafted. And then, just before the announcement was to be made internally, Charles paused. He stared out the window at the palace grounds. The gardens looked serene. The fountains sparkled. Birds chirped. The calm outside contrasted violently with the storm raging inside. And in that moment, Charles realized something else. Something terrifying. The breaking point wasn't him. It wasn't the advisors. It wasn't the press. It was Harry. And Harry was already moving. Charles felt a chill. Not because he feared Harry personally, but because he understood the scale of the conflict about to erupt. A father versus a son. A monarch versus a prince. A palace in turmoil. A family divided. And all over a title. He clenched his jaw. He would act. He must. But could he contain the aftermath? The answer was no. Because somewhere, thousands of miles away, Harry was already strategizing. Already mobilizing his legal team. Already considering actions that could shake the monarchy in ways Charles could never anticipate. And that, realizing that a son might defy a king, was what truly made Charles feel the weight of history pressing down upon him. A storm was coming. A storm bigger than a title. Bigger than a palace. Bigger than any precedent. And Charles had no choice but to meet it head on. But what happened next, inside those chambers, behind those doors, with advisors scrambling and the decision finalized? What came next would shock even the most seasoned royal aides. Because someone inside that room had information that could rewrite the narrative entirely. Someone Charles trusted. Someone he would soon realize might not be on his side after all. And that revelation would change everything. It wasn't a single event. Not a scandal. Not a rumor. Not a headline. It was a chain reaction. A series of small, almost invisible moments that, when strung together, created a firestorm capable of shaking the foundation of one of the oldest monarchies in the world. But let's start at the beginning. Have you ever wondered what truly causes a royal crisis? Most people think it's the public scandal, the paparazzi photo, the whispered betrayal, the viral headline. But the real crises, the ones that topple legacies and fracture families, often begin quietly, privately, in moments that the public never sees. And this one started months, maybe years, before the news of Meghan's title being stripped ever reached Harry. It began with internal discussions, subtle comments, questions asked during meetings that seemed mundane at the time. Should we consider reviewing the title? A junior aide would ask. Is this still appropriate? Another would add. All questions, all safe enough to dismiss, but all recorded meticulously in logs and minutes that would later become crucial pieces of evidence in what was coming. Then came the whispers, not from the press, not from critics, but from inside the palace itself. Staff members who were frustrated. Staff members who felt overlooked. Staff members who feared the shifting dynamics of the modern monarchy. One phrase kept recurring in the corridors: too much attention, too much influence, too unconventional. Imagine that. A system designed to adapt, evolve, and represent a modern institution slowly mutating into something fragile because the people inside can't handle change. And the irony? That fragility, that fear, ultimately reached Charles's ears. The king, who spent decades balancing tradition and progression, suddenly found himself forced to act, not out of malice, but out of what he perceived as necessity. What made it worse was timing. You see, the monarchy, in its public form, is a delicate mechanism. Every decision is a domino. Every public perception counts. And every delay can magnify problems exponentially. By the time the leaked document reached Harry, the decision wasn't just about Meghan's title anymore. It was about setting a precedent. It was about sending a message. A message to anyone considering stepping outside the traditional expectations of royal conduct. And, of course, it was a message to Harry. But let's be honest, messages like this never land as intended. Charles wanted control. He wanted authority. He wanted to protect the image of the monarchy. But did he anticipate the backlash? Did he anticipate Harry's legal reaction? Did he anticipate the global storm that would ensue once the news leaked? No, because no one truly can predict the reaction of someone who feels betrayed by family and institution at the same time. So what actually triggered the final decision? There were multiple factors. First, the perception that Meghan had been pushing boundaries, subtle, invisible, yet enough to make the palace nervous. Appearances, gestures, media interactions, alliances, all meticulously tracked and catalogued. Then, the legal and procedural angle. Advisors argued over precedents, over the language of the royal constitution, over loopholes and obligations. A senior legal team even presented alternatives to title stripping, but the king overruled them. He wanted clarity, finality, and an unmistakable assertion of authority. And finally, there was the political pressure. The Commonwealth, though silent publicly, was buzzing behind the scenes. Diplomats and foreign dignitaries were questioning how the monarchy managed its public image. Internal memos hinted at concerns from high-ranking officials. If this continues, the public perception could weaken the monarchy in ways we haven't seen since. Insert historical reference. Pressure, perception, precedent, all converged into one final, unavoidable conclusion. Action had to be taken. But here's the twist. Even with all this, the actual moment that triggered the move was something almost nobody expected. It wasn't Meghan's public appearances. It wasn't Harry's interviews. It wasn't even media speculation. It was a confidential report. A report that came from someone deep inside the palace, someone trusted implicitly by Charles, who had quietly documented actions, statements, and incidents over months. The report detailed inconsistencies, potential breaches of protocol, and influences that, if left unchecked, could threaten the monarchy's authority. Charles read it. He read it twice. And the third time, he closed his eyes and exhaled slowly. He understood the magnitude. He understood the implications. He understood the risk. And for the first time in years, he felt the kind of pressure that only comes from knowing history is watching your every move. And history is unforgiving. That report, combined with the leaks and Harry's growing influence in public discussions, pushed him to the edge. He had no choice but to make a decisive, irreversible move. But let's not forget the human element in all of this. Charles was a father, not just a king. A father who had watched his son navigate life, marriage, and public scrutiny. A father who had once held his son as a baby, walked beside him as a child, and debated with him as a young man. And now he was about to strip a title that symbolized not just union and recognition, but the family itself. Imagine that weight. Could any parent truly be comfortable making a decision like that? Could any father watch his child's life upended, knowing that, in the eyes of the public, he was the cause? That tension between duty and love, between tradition and compassion, is what made this crisis uniquely explosive. And then came the leaks. Because while Charles had the report, the advisors, and the internal memos, someone outside the inner circle had already tipped Harry off. The very act Charles thought would be quiet, controlled, and calculated was no longer under his control. That's when the storm began to brew. Not in newspapers, not in press conferences, not on TV, but in Harry's mind, in Meghan's heart, in the corridors of the monarchy. And all of it centered on one simple truth. When authority clashes with family, the fallout is unpredictable. Charles had thought he was making a statement of power. He had thought he was protecting the monarchy. He had thought he could manage the narrative. He was wrong, because the palace had underestimated Harry, and the palace had underestimated the consequences of a father pushing a son too far. And so the crisis escalated. Leads to questions everyone would soon ask. What exactly did Charles fear? Was this a defensive maneuver or an act of revenge? And most importantly, did he consider what Harry would do next? Because when the king moves, the world watches. When the king acts against family, the world waits to see if the family will fight back. And Harry, already furious, already betrayed, was not a man who would wait. And that's where the real drama begins. The document, the report, the leaked memos, the whispers in the corridors, the unseen pressures of history and protocol, all converged into one irreversible act, one that would shake the monarchy and force a legal battle no one thought possible. But what happened next inside the palace, in the quiet moments before the decision became public? That moment would change the entire narrative. And no one, Charles, Harry, or Meghan, was prepared for it. Harry never intended to sue his father. Never. Not in public. Not in private. Not even in thought. But when the document appeared in his hands, final, stamped, official, he realized the monarchy had left him no choice. And what happens when someone leaves you no choice? You fight. You strategize. You prepare to take every tool you have, and maybe some you didn't know existed, and use them. Harry called his closest advisors, not the ones who usually dealt with ceremonial issues, not the ones who whispered about public image and protocol. No, he called the legal team. The ones who could act, the ones who could move, the ones who could challenge centuries of tradition if necessary. The first question they asked was obvious. Do you realize what you're doing? Harry looked at them and simply said, yes. Because he did. He understood the magnitude, the implications, the backlash, the headlines, the accusations, and he understood the stakes. Stripping Meghan's title wasn't just about her. It was about him. It was about their family. It was about the power of the monarchy versus the rights of individuals. He asked his legal team to think unconventionally, boldly, creatively, strategically. Prepare for a legal challenge, he said. Make it airtight. Make it public if we have to. Prepare for the storm, because it's coming. And the storm wasn't hypothetical. This was more than a title. This was a precedent, a test case that could reverberate around the globe. A legal battle that would pit father against son, tradition against modernity, secrecy against transparency. Harry's team began reviewing historical cases, rare instances where royals challenged authority or contested ceremonial decisions. Few existed. Fewer succeeded. But that didn't stop them. They analyzed legal loopholes. They studied the wording of the royal constitution. They mapped the exact path a case could take if it went public. Harry wasn't thinking about revenge. He wasn't thinking about headlines. He was thinking about fairness and justice, because the memo he had received didn't just remove Meghan's title. It contained reasoning that seemed arbitrary, contradictory, possibly even manipulated. He knew he had to act fast. Every second counts, he told his team. We can't wait for the palace to finalize anything. We strike first, strategically, but carefully. But strategy isn't just about timing. It's about optics. It's about perception. It's about controlling the narrative while you control the legal motion. And Harry knew the optics were as dangerous as the legal risks. Because the world was already watching. Millions of eyes, billions of impressions, all waiting to see who would act first and who would be the villain. Have you ever had to plan something where the smallest misstep could destroy everything? Where a single word, a single decision, could be misinterpreted by the public, the press, or even your own allies? Harry knew that feeling intimately. Every press leak, every unintended comment, every photograph had been weaponized before. And now, this legal battle was a chess game played on a global stage. He instructed his team to prepare contingency plans for every possible reaction. The palace response, the media frenzy, the social media storm, international commentary. Nothing could be left to chance. And then came the most difficult part. They had to decide what to reveal and what to hold back. Because revealing too much could inflame the public, provoke backlash, and even jeopardize Meghan's position further. Revealing too little could make them look weak, indecisive, or uninformed. Harry spent hours deliberating. He weighed each sentence, each potential headline, each quote, each leak. And then, the legal strategy began to take shape. It was multi-layered. It was bold. It was unprecedented. Step 1. File a formal challenge that questioned the legality of the title removal process. Step 2. Prepare a public statement to accompany it, carefully worded to avoid unnecessary provocation, but strong enough to establish Harry's position. Step 3. Ensure Meghan was fully briefed, prepared, and protected. Step 4. Identify potential allies who could provide testimony, evidence, or expert opinion to strengthen the case. But here's the twist. Harry didn't just rely on traditional legal maneuvers. He prepared a strategy that leveraged media, public perception, and historical precedent in a coordinated plan. Because in a battle between the monarchy and a royal family member, law alone is rarely enough. You also need influence. You need narrative control. You need momentum. And Harry intended to have all three. By mid-afternoon, he had made the decision. The legal documents were drafted. The messaging plan was drafted. The allies had been contacted discreetly. But there was one variable he couldn't control. One person, King Charles. No matter how airtight the strategy, No matter how meticulously prepared, no matter how perfect the timing, the king was unpredictable. And unpredictability is dangerous when you're standing on a precipice, ready to challenge centuries of protocol. Harry's mind raced. What if Charles accelerated the title removal publicly before Harry filed the challenge? What if the palace preemptively framed the narrative against them? What if history painted them as reckless, rebellious, and ungrateful? The risk was immense. But the alternative, doing nothing, was worse. And so Harry chose action over inaction. Because when the stakes are this high, hesitation is fatal. Have you ever been in a situation where the only choice is to act, even if acting could destroy everything you love? That's exactly where Harry was. And then the first alert came. From someone inside the palace. Someone trusted. Someone who may or may not have known Harry's intentions. They had noticed the preparations, the early mobilization, the contacts. And in that moment, Harry realized something he hadn't considered. The palace wasn't asleep. They weren't passive. They were watching. They were ready. And that meant the battle had officially begun. He exhaled slowly and whispered to himself, "They think they can play this quietly. They think they can control it. They don't know me. They don't know what I'm capable of." But Harry didn't yet know the biggest twist of all. Because someone inside that palace, someone who had been quietly feeding information to Charles, had noticed the early legal maneuver. And the information they sent would not just complicate the process. It would change the entire trajectory of the lawsuit. And it would introduce a new, unexpected player into a story that was already spiraling out of control. A player that no one anticipated. And their involvement would change everything. The world loves a scandal. But what happens when the scandal isn't about your personal choices? What happens when it's about perception, timing, and timing alone? Meghan Markle was about to find out. It started with an email. A single email from Netflix, brief, formal, but with the kind of language that makes the stomach drop. "Due to recent developments, we are reviewing your contract." Those 6 words, short, innocuous, but devastating, sent tremors through Meghan's carefully curated world. Netflix, her platform, her project, her voice. And now, threatened, Meghan stared at the screen. She had spent months preparing this series. Months of planning, filming, collaborating, and maintaining a delicate balance between public image and personal narrative. And now, one internal memo could unravel everything. Have you ever invested your heart, your time, and your energy into something, only to have it teeter on the edge because of forces entirely outside your control? That was Meghan, sitting at her desk, heart pounding, fingers hovering over the keyboard, trying to process what this really meant. The news quickly leaked. Not maliciously, not intentionally, but leaks happen. They always do in Hollywood. Within hours, online forums were buzzing. Headlines appeared. Tweets flew. News outlets speculated. Netflix drops Markle's project? Royal contracts at risk? Duchess or disaster? Suddenly, Meghan was once again in the eye of the storm. But this wasn't the first time. The palace had learned early on that Meghan's public image was fragile, not because of who she was, but because the media wanted her to fail. Every story, every rumor, every tweet was dissected, every misstep magnified, every smile misinterpreted. And now, with Netflix questioning her deal, the narrative was accelerating in the worst possible direction. Meghan felt cornered, not by critics, not by the press, but by perception, by timing, by a system that seemed to be testing her at every turn. She tried to call Harry. He answered immediately, and in that call, she let the frustration pour out. "They're trying to ruin me. Everything we've built, everything we've worked for, they're tearing it down before it even launches." Harry listened, calm but furious, because this wasn't just about Meghan's career. This was about influence, about narrative, about the ability to control your own story in a world that constantly misrepresents you. "They don't get to do this," Harry said, voice low and steady. "We're going to fight. Every single step. Legally, publicly, strategically. They will not define you. They will not define us." But even with Harry's reassurance, Meghan couldn't shake the feeling that this was bigger than just Netflix. Because it was. The real issue wasn't the contract. It wasn't the money. It wasn't even the public perception. It was the precedent, the signal it sent. If Netflix pulled out, other networks, other partners, other collaborators would see this. They would perceive her as controversial, risky, unpredictable. And in the entertainment industry, perception is everything. Meanwhile, inside the palace, strategists were monitoring the unfolding drama. They knew that this crisis could either damage Meghan or strengthen her. They also knew that Harry's reaction would be critical. And Harry was reacting, quietly, meticulously, and without hesitation. He instructed his team to begin damage control, not just legally, but in the court of public opinion. Statements were drafted, carefully worded, to emphasize fairness, contract obligations, and industry norms. Yet nothing mentioned the palace or the title dispute. Because the strategy was layered, hit in one arena while preparing to hit back in another. Meghan was briefed. She understood the nuance. She understood the balance. She also understood the stakes. The first public response was subtle, almost invisible. A post here, an interview snippet there. Nothing explicit, nothing inflammatory, just enough to signal that she was aware, engaged, and ready. But the media pounced anyway. Headlines exploded. Analysts debated. Fans defended. Critics mocked. And through it all, Meghan had to maintain composure. Public composure.